Hey there, hunters. Welcome back to the Gunners Guild. Today, we're yet again talking about bowguns after spending much more time testing things. And yes, I should have probably done more thorough testing before making previous videos and putting those out there for people to consume. Sure, that's on me. But I was working with the info I had and just trying to keep everyone up to date with everything that's being discovered, which is exactly what I'm here doing again. So, of course, we're going to have to do updated bowgun information again after all this testing. So we did get the motion values for all the ammo now. We just have to double, triple check with other people to make sure that they're accurate. And we got some more updated sets and a whole bunch of good stuff. But if you're here wondering where all the bow information's at, well then just go check out Titus because he dropped a great bow guide video. I honestly recommend just checking him out as I'm still trying to get comfy with PC controls for bow. So don't wait on me for that. Maybe by the time the expansion comes out, I'll have something. But anyway, still got bowgun stuff to do. So let's get into the bowgun update. Since we had this newest patch, which did fix some issues, we discovered a couple more. So let's get into what we tested more and what is and is not working for bowguns. And let me just go down this list because we tested this all on stream and some off stream. First is the burst skill. While burst is good, I hope it's bugged because currently burst does not provide any elemental damage boost for bowguns, even though the description says that it just does. It doesn't exclude bowguns, and it works for every single other weapon including bow, just not bowguns. So is this a bug or an oversight, or is Capcom intentionally hating on bowguns? Either way it sucks, but even so, burst is still worth throwing on your sets, at least the first point, because burst still provides 6 raw for a few seconds after like 5 hits, and both pierce and elemental takes will activate burst after the first shot, so you're pretty much always going to have this up as long as you keep shooting. Subsequent ranks of burst provide 1 more raw for each rank, making each additional point not really worth taking, as rank 5 is only going to give you a total of 10 raw, or 13 if you have 2 pieces of Odogaron, and 20 total raw with 4 pieces of Odogaron. Still the best bang for your buck for a single level 3 decoration here on bowguns, and yes, I'm going to be including this on both raw and elemental sets, since we do still want raw for elemental ammo. Next is the flare skill. So flare does not actually help bowguns inflict wounds any easier at all. I checked the numbers of hits it would take to wound Rathian's legs with no flare skills, flare 2 and flare 5, and checked them twice just in case, and they all ended up taking exactly 50 shots of my dinky rare 3 normal 2 light bowgun. Again, I don't know if this is a bug or if Capcom's intentionally making things not work on bowguns. Time will tell, but Capcom has been very nice to us in Wilds for sure. Now, the other part of flare is the damage proc after you deal like 9,000 damage. On bowguns, this does indeed proc, and you can see that the effect and numbers pop up just fine, but at least on the target dummy, it doesn't actually register the damage, so I'm not really sure if it works, or if it's just like a visual thing, since I don't have like the overlay to test it on a monster and check. So if somebody knows, let me know. It's not a big deal anyway, as that part of flare is never going to be worth taking the skill, because it just takes way too long to trigger. But either way, flare is 100% useless for bowguns. Moving on from flare, let's get into part breaker, because part breaker also does not increase the damage of our focus strikes with bowguns. I've heard multiple reports that it doesn't work on some other melee weapons as well, but of course I didn't try those. But this whole skill may just be messed up. Either way, the whole part breaker and flare combo, which is kind of cool on paper with like light bowguns countermines, is pretty much 100% dead, because flare is useless and so is part breaker, and you might as well be using no skills at all. Next is the elemental skills, being elemental up, crit element, and coalescence. People have been talking about how these don't work on some weapons or don't bypass elemental caps or whatever, and I found this not to be the case for bowguns. Damo on Viettner's Discord was testing these, and I was on stream the other day testing them out, and he had also found out that coalescence is in fact a percentage of your elemental damage boost here in Wilds, 10, 20, and 30% per skill rank, whereas it was a flat buff in Worlds. This means it's significantly more useful on high elemental weapons as opposed to lower ones, which is the reverse of what it was in World, hence the confusion most likely. But it does work just fine here on bowguns, thankfully. Of course, your elemental attack up skills are also working just fine here on bowguns with no issues hitting any sort of like elemental cap at all. Just wanted to point that out. And then finally we have elemental crit. And elemental crit values are different based upon the weapon using them, just like in 5th gen. Damo again and some other Discord users had mapped out that for heavy bowgun, the elemental crit values are 7, 14, and 21% based on the level of elemental crit, which isn't too bad. Light bowgun and bow are much noticeably lower, bow being so low that it's basically not worth running at all. That could be bugged, it's that low. It's like no increase at all. No final numbers on light bowgun yet, but I'm thinking it's a 5, 10, 15% bonus. It's still decent, but it is noticeably worse than heavy bowgun. Speaking of elemental though, we might as well talk about elemental ammo because it's slightly different here in Wilds. Elemental's motion value is a 25 here in Wilds, but really what makes it different is that the motion value is only going to be multiplied by your base weapon's raw, whereas previous game, the Elemental motion value for Elemental ammo was based on your total raw. And now it's the Elemental skills and percentage bonuses such as, LE crit, and Coalescence that are going to be affected by your total raw only. And I don't quite know the entire formula for Elemental ammo, but basically what it means is that you do want a high raw bowgun more than getting, raw through buffs and skills, which is why for Arshan you want full attack buffs. Scaling your raw is still important in general, but the weapon raw much more so. Probably won't matter to most people, but I just thought it'd be interesting to point out there. And since we're on the topic of Elemental ammo, of course, we're going to have to talk about the frame rate, because we all knew frame rate would affect us somehow, some way, because it always seems to. Thankfully, it appears that only Elemental ammo is affected by frame rate here in Wilds, but the tick rate is indeed affected. So what this means is that if you lower your frame rate and cap it to 35 frames, or it can hold a steady cap of 144, you can consistently hit 7 ticks of Elemental rather than, the normal 5 here on PC or 6 on console. It's all over the place. This is not exclusive to the target dummy. Yes, this does work on monsters, and shoutouts to everyone in the Gathering Hall Discord for testing it thoroughly. I have also confirmed that it works for both light and heavy bowgun, and Pierce ammo is not affected. This is strictly Elemental ticks. I tested this with frame rates of 25, 35, 50, 60, 75, 80, 100, 105, and 144 frames. But honestly, the most consistent was 35 frames and 144 frames. This also works for rapid fire for light bowgun and while mounted with heavy bowgun. So yeah, that's a thing, and I hate it. But at least you can make Wilds look smooth enough if you run 35 frame cap and then throw frame generation on top of it. But yeah, this is a dark day for us indeed. But I guess on paper it does make Elemental ammo better. Moving on to the great Pierce debate. I've had a lot of people ask which is better, Odo or Ray Dow light bowgun, Steel Assault versus Gore Magala heavy bowgun, and I've always said just pick whatever you want. And after doing a lot more tests, I can say just pick whatever you want. Higher clip size weapons are nice as they reload less often, and that's wonderful, but they're also going to be shooting Pierce 2s, not Pierce 3s, which are noticeably weaker. So that being said, over 30 and 40 second periods of just straight firing, they always end up pretty much exactly in line with each other, plus or minus some crit RNG here and there. This is true for both light and heavy bowguns. It really doesn't matter that much which one you pick. There are pros and cons to either. One's going to require more time shooting, the other's going to require more time reloading. But in the end, they're going to be within 1% or less than each other. However, for heavy bowgun, I did find that Arshan heavy bowguns, despite not having, standard mode, do compete with Steel Assault and Gore Magala heavy bowgun, as they can come up with a clip 5 of Pierce 3, still have solid raw, and even have Paralysis 2 or Sticky 2 or Sleep 2 ammo on the backup. So in the end, Arshan heavy bowgun's the real winner in my books, but for real, just pick whatever you want. Next thing to discuss was the Opener 1 versus Opener 3 skill. Some people have claimed that there's no difference between reloads on using Opener 1 and Opener 3, and you only need 1 point. I found this to be not true, and there's clearly faster reload speeds between no Opener, Opener 1, and Opener 3. I always advocate for running Opener 3, but on things with really fast reloads such as Elemental ammo, probably not worth it as much. But for the most part, especially if you're running Pierce, you do want Opener 3. And then we have the topic of mounted combat for heavy bowgun. I did not mention it before, and admittedly did not test for it, but mounted combat does come with a 10% damage penalty, sadly. So you are in fact slightly weaker on a secret than on the ground with a heavy bowgun. The real question here then becomes, is that worth it? You gain a slightly faster reload and recover animation, you have higher mobility than walking around, and the ability to sit with max might on. Is that a trade-off worth running the mounted secret and the 10% damage loss? Honestly, that's entirely up to you, but for me personally, I think it's worth it, because outside of just stats and frame data, mobility is huge, and less blocking with heavy bowgun means less repositioning and more time firing, so I still think it's worth the 10% damage loss, but that is another thing that you should consider before blindly running, with mounted combat. Of course, mounted combat is most likely not going to be permitted under TA rules when that finally gets established, but nobody cares about those anyway, so go crazy. Okay, with all of that testing out of the way, now we have to adjust our sets with the new information we have available, and to be honest, this is just going to be more and more boring because we're going to be using the same set for everything, and it seems like all the other weapons are following suit, because we're just going to use Gore Magala full set now, like 4 full piece bonus for everything. Reason being is that the Gore set is just kind of better at everything. 2-piece Gore lets you generate Frenzy all the time, and that's fine, that's cool. It lets us keep up Coalescence and Affinity from the Antivirus skill, which is another 15% Affinity. That is the only offensive skill we can actually get on a level 1 decoration slot, which means it's pretty much free. And the 4-piece bonus provides us with 10 raw while we have frenzy and 15 raw for a while after you cleanse it, and the uptime's pretty much 100%, so it's almost as good as agitator, but also nets us defensive skills like evade window and some slots to work with. So really what we end up having to do with these sets is trade for either weakness exploit or agitator for Gore 4-piece. So I have 2 sets here, and I can't even know which one's going to be better because the uptimes are going to be all over the place. The first is going to be weakness exploit and Gore 4-piece using Arcfell chest and Wex talisman. This set will give us the 4-piece of Gore and antivirus for 15 raw and 15 affinity. Plus we have weakness exploit 5, and you can do with whatever you want with the free slots. I assume this is going to be the same set that nearly every weapon is going to be running, so yeah, it's just standard. With my setup here, I ended up slotting in that 1 point of burst for 6 raw, 1 point of agitator for 4 raw and 3 affinity during enrage, nothing major, feel free to change that out, and max might for more affinity even if the uptime isn't perfect. There's really nothing else you can do that's going to help your damage, because there's also nothing really here you can put in that's going to help your damage. And then I have a free level 2 slot that I put in an evade extender. Again, feel free to change out the max might decorations for evade extender and evade window if you want more defensive setups, or you can take out the agitator and evade extender for coalescence and finish that off for an elemental build. I like the uptime on the weakness exploit, and I find that better than agitator for elemental builds, so I tend to use this more than the other set, which is just trading weakness exploit for agitator. This is going to be an entirely identical setup, just trading Arcfell chest for Bowgun chest and weakness exploit talisman for agitator talisman. Again, exact same skills, but you get agitator 5 over weakness exploit 5. I think this is a better approach for raw, but it's hard to gauge if that's the case when you have to factor in all the uptime on agitator and such. Weakness exploit is always 30% affinity, and then sometimes you get 50% on weak spots. Agitator is 20 raw and 15% affinity, but only active while the monster's enraged, which admittedly is a lot. I'd say probably about 75% of the hunt. So is 30% affinity better than 15 raw and 11 affinity? Close? I don't know. The option's up to you, but I feel like they're going to be pretty dang close for the same thing. That doesn't really matter one way or the other, so pick whatever you'd like. But this is going to be the set that I'm using for pretty much everything until, we get a title update and new armor pieces. And anyway, as I've shown off here, I'm still using Max Might because I find that Max Might 3 is probably going to be better than Max Might 2 and 1 point of agitator or Wex. And there's really nothing I can do with these level 2 decoration slots. So I know Max Might isn't amazing, we just don't really have better options. Light Bowgun, obviously you're not going to see much use of Max Might given the burst step playstyle, so I do recommend trading those out for evade window or evade extender even. But Heavy Bowgun definitely makes this much better since you can use Max Might while you're on your secret, and you can use Max Might while you're burning Wyvern Heart. So again, your call, just feel free to move the decos around, but the set's pretty much solid. So I think that's everything I wanted to talk about. That's going to be all for me. Apologies for any miscommunication or wrong data in the past, but I'm always trying to present the most accurate info I can. So I'm going to keep on updating as we figure out more. But yeah, thank you all for watching, and good luck out there, hunters.